Nice to be with you this evening. So I wrote a book called I Met a Monk. And what is a cookery writer doing writing a book about meeting a monk, you might well ask? Well, it's a long story, but basically my husband started learning to meditate at a monastery quite close to us, and he found it so helpful. He asked me if we could hold some talks in our house when a monk would come and tell everybody how to meditate, how to be mindful, and some of the useful things that my husband had been learning at the monastery. I was a bit reluctant. I didn't really want anything remotely religious. I was perfectly happy in my life. I was happy with my New Age teachings, my affirmations, my visualization, my yoga, and the various things that I was doing was fine. But I wanted to be welcoming and helpful, and I knew it meant a lot to my husband, so we invited a monk into our house. We sent out invitations, and a lot of local people, some Buddhists, some just wanting to learn more about mindfulness, came, and they listened to the monk. And that's how I met him. This really lovely, gentle, humble guy knocked at my door, and I opened the door, and he had come to take the first retreat. I didn't know what to do. I thought, you're not supposed to touch a monk. How do you behave with a monk? Anyway, my husband did know, and he was very confident. We took the monk into the garden to have a little wander around while the other people arrived, and then we all gathered in our sitting room, and the monk spoke. And he told us how to be mindful. He said one thing that really turned me on, because, as I said, I was just a bit reluctant. I thought, well, I'm here, these people want to know all these things, and I want to make it good for them, but I'm not going to get involved. Anyway, the monk said, Buddhism is so simple, you can write it on the back of a postcard, all you need to know. And I thought, wow. How can that be? Religions are usually so complex, and I loved that idea. And what he was talking about was the principles of Buddhism, which are, of course, the Four Noble Truths, and that's all you need. He said, I don't ever have notes for any talks I give. Actually, he's not allowed to have notes as a practicing monk. They're not allowed to speak from notes. But he doesn't need them, because he has the Four Noble Truths in his mind, and the whole teaching springs from that. Anyway, that really made me sit up, and I thought, this is so interesting and great, and from that point I was hooked. Anyway, we had 8 sessions. Actually, in real life it was slightly different from in the book, because it was spread over a longer period of time. In the book I've concertinaed it up into an 8-week course. And also, the other thing that's a little bit different is all the people who attend the course, I have had to fictionalise them for the sake of privacy, really, and also for the sake of the book, to make it a little bit more lively and so on. So those are the only things that are different from real life. The teaching is the same. It's my words. I have voiced the monk's words myself, but it's Buddhist teaching. And it all starts off with the monk telling us how to be mindful, which is such a helpful thing in itself. You know, a lot of people don't know that mindfulness actually came from the Buddha. I'm sure that you would know tonight, but a lot of people don't know that it was straight from the Buddha. And I love to go right back to the source, because the Buddha's way of teaching mindfulness is so simple and straightforward. He does it with our breath. We will do it in a minute. But so that was the first thing the monk taught us, and then we went right through the Noble Truths and how to apply them to life and all the situations that arrive in life, and it was so helpful hearing how you can take an approach which brings you peace and happiness, and also brings happiness and peace to the world. It's a very wonderful way of living. And well, I don't say I'm a Buddhist, because I won't say I'm anything. I refuse to label myself, but all I can say is I put the teaching into practice in my life every day. I do the mindfulness, I do the meditation, and it has been the best thing that I have ever done. And just to get onto a personal note, I have really had to test it out, because after we'd had these retreats, my life took a very difficult turn. It's in the book. My husband suddenly got dementia, very badly, and now he's in a nursing home just within 2 years. So it's been very, very sad and difficult for me, and I don't know how I would have kept going if I hadn't had the teaching that the monk had given. It's brought me great peace and really helped me. I think it can help anybody. It's such a wonderful way of finding our own strength and peace and happiness. It's a very happy teaching. Have I covered everything? I had notes here. I never keep to my notes. I've just spoken off the cuff. Just to sum up the book, it gives the teaching. It's arranged in a course, so there's 8 weeks. You don't have to do them over 8 weeks. You can do them over any period of time you want, or you can just dip in. I suggest that you do it as a course because it's really helpful that way. And at the end of it, I love the last chapter, actually. You wait till you get to the last chapter. You'll go to heaven in that last chapter. You really will. It's just the presence that the monk brings into the room is so beautiful. But if I can sum up the book in my own words, there are 3 keys in there to happiness, freedom and peace. The mindfulness breathing, which, as I say, we'll just do in a moment. The metta, which is loving kindness, and that's a theme throughout the book. Metta and mindfulness are 2 twin pillars of Buddhism, and then there's the 4 Noble Truths, which are explained in the book. I won't go through them now, but if you get those 3 things, you've got the key to a happy, peaceful life. I'd just like to say one more thing, talking about religion. The monk told us that actually Buddhism isn't really a religion. It's a way of being. And the Buddha never said, I'm inventing a religion. It was never like that. He just said he was saying, I speak about suffering and the way out of suffering. And that was how he started Buddhism. You probably know the story, but I just think it's very touching, actually. He was brought up in a palace. He was kept away from any kind of suffering. He was kept within the palace grounds. He wasn't allowed out. His father had been told before he was born that he would either be a great ruler or a great spiritual person. And his father didn't want him to be a great spiritual person, so he kept him away from anything that might make him like that. But the Buddha broke out, Gautama Buddha broke out, and he went into the town. This is a well-known story, and he saw suffering, he saw death, he saw sickness, he saw old age, he saw pain, and he resolved then that his life work would be to find an answer to suffering. And he roamed around for about 5 years in the wilderness, starving himself, doing all sorts of things. And at the end of it, he just thought, I'm going to just have to sit and let this happen. He sat under a tree, he went into a spiritual state, and he got the answer, which is the 4 Noble Truths. If you put those into practice, you overcome suffering. There's little cards. I hope you might be able to take some little cards when you go. Chris has got one. There are these little cards that come in the book, because it can be written on a postcard. So the publisher very kindly made me these postcards, which have got the 4 Noble Truths written on them, just like the monk said, in very short. Actually, they haven't even put the whole of the 4th Noble Truth there, but they are there, because that is the key to the book and to the Buddhist teaching. But as I say, it's a teaching. It's not a religion, and the Buddha didn't want it to be a religion. It's a way of being, and anyone can do it. Anyone. Writing the book, for me, was really, first of all, I was so impressed when the monk said, everything you need to know about Buddhism can be written on a postcard. And I thought, wow, I just thought Buddhism was a very complicated thing. I had no idea. I mean, okay, you can complicate it. Complicated books have been written on it, but you don't need it. The essential, really true Buddhism that came direct from the Buddha is so simple. So I then started reading some Buddhist books. There are various branches of Buddhism. This is the one that I'm interested in. It's called Theravada Buddhism, which is the earliest one, the one direct from the Buddha. His words were remembered by his disciples and the people who heard him, his disciples really, or his monks. And they repeated them over and over again for 300 years, until they could be written down. So that we have a very, very direct source of Buddhist teaching. So I started reading some Theravada teaching, particularly the books of Ajahn Sumedho, which are very, very helpful. And as I read them, I just thought, I would like to write something about the monk and my experience and about Buddhism. I didn't know where I was going to begin, but I started writing a few notes on Sumedho's books so that I could get them in my head. I did it for myself in a way to start with, because I wanted to know more. And then I suddenly got the idea of describing our retreat, describing what had happened really. And I started writing, and every morning I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, no alarm clock, no nothing. I just woke up, went down to my desk, sat by my computer, and people came. I mean, I know I'm not saying it's all wooey spiritual stuff. I'm just saying it's like when anyone writes a novel, they say, they hear things, they see things, the people are there. This happened to me. There was a monk beside me. There were people coming in the door for the retreat. They weren't exactly the people that we'd had for our retreat, but they were similar people. And they're all described in the book, with their characters which developed through the book. So it was as if I was there, seeing it all and experiencing it, and I was writing it down. And so it almost had to be a book. It was difficult to get it published, I have to say. Because as a cookery writer, publishers didn't want this kind of stuff from me. They wanted more recipes. But in the end, I was thrilled when Watkins accepted it. I changed it a lot for Watkins. I mean, I developed it for Watkins, and so I was really thrilled. I felt it had a perfect publisher, and they've done such a good job with it. I love the way they produced it. Who inspired me was. He was English, he was British, but he had been, as monks are, he had travelled to other places. He'd been in Thailand. They often go to Thailand. He had quite a background. He was a Zen monk before he became a Buddhist monk, but then he felt that the Theravada teaching was speaking to him more, so he changed to that. And he had been practicing for, over 10 years, because he was an Ajahn. They become an Ajahn when they've been doing it for 10 years, and so he was. I'm not quite sure how long he was practicing. But he was so practical and down to earth. He was so kind of normal. I mean, he went to visit his father on a coach, because his father was 90, and he went with his bus pass. I mean, the monk had his bus pass, not the father. Well, the father probably did too, but the monk was travelling to visit him. I thought, how down to earth. One of the things I loved about him was how down to earth he was. One of the things he said at the beginning, I very timidly asked him if he'd like a cup of tea, because there's etiquette with monks. You can't touch them. I didn't know. I didn't want to do the wrong thing, so I asked him if he'd like a cup of tea, putting my hands together, would you like a cup of tea? And he said, oh, I'd love a cup of tea. Builder's tea, he said, nice and strong. He was allowed milk at that time of day, that was early on, but later he wasn't allowed milk, he had a soya milk, because they're not allowed to have any food or drink afternoon. And soya milk doesn't count. It's counted as a medicine, not a food. I mean, they have these rules which might appear slightly strange. Chocolate too is okay, as long as it's plain chocolate without milk in. So, but there's a lot to learn when you start entertaining a monk. But he was just lovely. The monk has seen the book. Actually, I showed him my very first manuscript, and I had a very encouraging letter back saying, just a little scribble from him really, saying, I think this will help a lot of people. And then I managed to get it published, and it was a much more expanded version once it was published. So I sent him a copy, and he said something really nice. I'm just trying to remember exactly what he said. He said something like, you have given a great gift for humanity in this book. From the monk saying that to me. I was so thrilled. I really was. No, he's very much, very, very supportive, which was wonderful. It was all I could wish for. The monastery is near Midhurst, between Midhurst and Petersfield in Hampshire, and it's called Chithurst Monastery. It's a lovely place if anyone wants to go and visit. They have an evening puja on a Saturday night, I don't get there very often at all. My husband used to go regularly, but it's very lovely to go. Very simple, lovely. I like to do a moment of mindfulness, because there are all sorts of ways of teaching mindfulness, but I think the simplest way, and for me the most effective way, is on the breath, and this is the one the monk taught me. So you just pause for a moment, and I will tell you what to do, and then we can do it. You just basically take a breath, and as you take it, you notice it going into your nose. If possible, right at your nostrils, but if you can't, feel it then, whenever you can, deeper in, and you feel it going down to your lungs and then up again. Follow it as much as you can. Keep your mind totally on your breath, because the idea is to be in the moment. Just accept it as it is. If it's short breath, that's okay. If it's a long breath, that's okay. It is as it is. So let's do it now. Just feels lovely and cool when it goes in. Into the nostrils, down and out. You can clear your mind completely because you just follow the breath. Just notice the breath, how it is. And when I do that, I feel calm. And since I learnt this from the monk, I have been doing it frequently. Try and remember, if you feel upset, if you feel worried, if you feel cross, whatever you feel, if you just immediately take a breath, just like we did now, it brings you peace. And if you do it again, it brings even more peace. The monk said, in the book, the monk said, you can do them on the hour. Do it every hour. Just take a mindfulness breath, or a minute. He talked about the mindfulness minute. Do it for a minute. If you can. I mean, it seems quite long actually when you're timing yourself breathing, but as long as you can, just do it, and it becomes a habit. And for me now, it's such a habit. It's just, I won't say I do it all the time, absolutely not, but I frequently do it throughout the day. I do it last thing at night, I have a mindfulness breath, and I do it when I wake up. It's been the most helpful thing I've ever done. And by the way, meditation, the way the monk teaches it, is only joined up mindfulness, because every breath you take keep on breathing, and you're meditating. And if thoughts come into your mind, don't worry, just notice your breath again. Keep going. And I think you'll find that a very, very useful thing to do in your life. It really has transformed my life. It truly has, so I hope it will help you too. I meditate regularly. When we started the course, I was finding meditation quite challenging. I didn't like it very much. I couldn't do it for very long. But the monk was so reassuring about it. He said, start with a couple of minutes or 5 minutes of meditation. Just do it. Find a time when you can do it, and do it, basically. Just breathe. If thoughts come into your mind, just let them go, and then breathe again. And gradually you can build up the amount of time that you're doing it. See how it goes. So I started doing that. Sometimes I only did a minute or 2 minutes. I found the mindfulness minutes very useful. I try to do them every hour. I set my watch to make an alarm every hour. And until I got so used to it, I wasn't noticing it, which you do if you have an alarm going off regularly. It was very useful, but it got me into the habit of it. So now, you ask me what I do now. I meditate every morning in bed for about 10-15 minutes, and the same thing at night. If I can do it in the middle of the day, I do, but not for as long. I'd like to do a similar period in the middle of the day as well at some point. But throughout the day, I have mini meditations when I do a mindfulness breath, maybe just a minute or a couple of minutes, just throughout the day. And as you do that, meditation really becomes a way of life. And honestly, it changes your life. It really does bring peace. And strength, because when you go inside yourself with the mindfulness breath, you actually contact your own strength and peace within you. And the more you do it, the stronger that pool of peace. I think of it as my pool of peace. The stronger it gets. And it is wonderful. Let's just briefly run through the Four Noble Truths, and in the book there is a postcard, as I say, with the Four Noble Truths on it, because that was what started me on my mission to write the book, because of the fact that you could put it on a postcard. And on this postcard it gives you the Four Noble Truths. Suffering is part of life. We acknowledge that. It is so true, and when you do that it's really helpful. There is a cause of suffering, and we look at the cause of suffering, which is basically clinging to things, wanting things to be different, wanting things to be better, and also not wanting to be as they are. So it's hate, as it were. I hate this, I can't bear it. We're not accepting things exactly as they are, or being sort of in a dream world and not accepting things as they are at all, not facing up to things. So it's greed, sometimes put in this way, greed, hate and delusion. It sounds a bit critical, but if we can face up to them, we all do it all the time. We get attached to things, we want certain things. You know, we want a nice seat on the train when we're travelling up to London. We don't always get it. Just have to accept it as it is. If we can accept things as they are, we free ourselves from all that pain. And then, so suffering can be ended. That's the third noble truth, the cessation of suffering. Once we come to terms with accepting things as they are. And it's in our mindfulness breathing, but it's so easy to accept things as they are, because we are in the moment. The breath is as it is, life is as it is, and there's peace. So we try and just find that sense of peace. We don't blot out our suffering, we don't pretend it's not. What? Anger? I'm not angry. You know, we don't do that sort of approach. we accept, okay, I am angry, I'm absolutely furious, but this is not the real me. I can let it go. There's a place of me where there's peace. We let it go. We find out the reason for the anger. Is it because we're hating something? Is it because we're clinging to something? And so on. All this is explained in the book in a very simple way. We go through these things, we examine them ourselves, and we find our own peace. And then the fourth noble truth is a very practical one. It is, there is a path that leads to freedom, happiness and peace. And that is practical things we can do in our life. It's called the Eightfold Path. And that is, I can think of the right, if I can get them in the right order, it's the right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right endeavour, and right concentration. We do those, and he explains them all in the book, and they help us to put into practice the other three nobles. It all works together. It's so lovely. The Buddha was amazing, how everything links together. He had the most amazing logical brain. I'm quite in love with the Buddha. Although I don't call myself a Buddhist, I don't call myself anything, but I follow the Buddha's teaching, definitely, and it's really worked for me. Karma is a Buddhist concept. The monk was a little bit offhand about karma, really. He said he didn't like people saying, oh, that's my karma, and sort of saying, oh, you did this to me in ancient Rome, and therefore I can do that to you in this life. He said karma can be very misused. Karma actually means action. So it's like if you put your hand in the fire, fire burns you. If you say something horrible to someone, they may say something horrible back to you. In actual fact, karma can be a very, very simple concept, and the monk didn't want us to put too much emphasis on it, but instead to try and behave impeccably ourselves, as well as we could, following the Eightfold Path. And he goes right through all the things, you know, saying how to do it, practical things that people asked about, you know, how particular you have to be, and what about this, that and the other thing in the world that's happening, you know, for instance abortion, what was the Buddhist approach of that, and so on. And he gives the most helpful answers. I thought they were wonderful. So it's the practical side of it, which is great. yes, to come back to what karma is, it is cause and effect really, but just accept it in a very basic kind of way and not be too ooey-hooey about it. Okay, right. You're welcome.